Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by my brother from the Fatimiyya Sufi order, Brother Matt Douglas, who returns in this series of dialogues and conversations that we've been having on this channel. And I'm always honored, and it's always a pleasure to learn from Brother Matt and to be able to take those insights on the spiritual journey that we're all on. So, without any further ado, Nur alaikum and welcome to Brother Matt. How are you today?
Oh, Nur Salman, doing pretty good. Um, yeah, actually been traveling around a bit, as I indicated some of my last podcast. So I kind of wanted to touch up on, kind of like um, a little bit about some of what I experienced traveling, but also want to talk about um, I do want to talk a lot about Thailand since that's where I am most of the time, more or less my home now, and what's been going on there, and maybe touch on a few other issues that aren't getting much coverage.
All right.
Okay, well, last time we talked about how because both of us um, did our share of flying um, west to east, and usually going through some of the smaller countries in the Middle East that are really booming, for tourists. Um, so now I actually get to, spend a few days in one of them. Um, Mostly I just spent that was in the UAE. I stuck to Abu Dhabi. I know everybody says go to Dubai, and I could have done it with a little over an hour bus ride in addition, but one place at a time. Um, there's plenty to do in Abu Dhabi as well. Um, and I definitely had mixed feelings about it. Um, on the one hand, it was a desert, so it reminded me of Southern California, even if it was kind of hot. Um, but in terms of the really positive thing there, I mean, they're definitely catering to family. Um, uh, family tourism. A lot of amusement parks are being opened up. Granted, I just being going kind of solo. I wasn't gonna shell out my cash for that. But I mean, they're even building amusement parks indoors. With full roller coasters. Um, I think up in Dubai they even have like a indoor ski slope. So it's needless to say that's pricey. Um, and while I in and of itself don't mind that, I want to see the day where your average working family can afford that. And right now, that's out of people's price range, probably even some of the local working families as well. Um, but what was really interesting, I was once just wanting to enjoy the beach, and the main boulevard by the beach had tunnels going under it to the other side, and they all had murals on them. And there was one with a space themed mural. The pics are actually up on my Facebook page. I even took some video footage, just showing all the pictures. And one thing that I thought was really cool was they were showing an astronaut with, and obviously you can't see the face because they're inside, it's inside the helmet, but um, they did have like a, United Arab Emirates patch on the spacesuit. And I thought that was pretty cool because this is just a small country of saying, hey, we can go into space too. So I really liked that. There was vision. Um, at the same time, like things were a bit too commercial for me. I felt, um, and I don't have a problem in general with um, building up an economy, but there's more just and less just ways to do it. Um, more respectful and less respectful ways to do it. Um, One of their main attractions is the Grand Mosque, and I was kind of turned off, even though it was a gorgeous place, a gorgeous, gorgeous place. There was so much commercialism around it. Um, I don't mind there being vendors nearby a temple. I mean, here in Thailand, you'll see plenty of street hawkers, near the temple, sometimes even on the temple grounds. But these are small businesses making a very humble living. Whereas with the Grand Mosque, you immediately, I take a taxi there, and I'm at what I think is like some other little site on the grounds because it's a huge parking lot. Probably, I want to say a good 500 meters. Um, that I have to walk across the parking lot. Okay, no big deal. I can walk, but there was this what seemed to be other little buildings set up. So just while I was there, before I started my walk, I went into one of them, finding out the reason why the taxi had dropped me off there is because this building was kind of how you accessed it. You accessed it through an underground tunnel. And in order to go and get the tickets, you basically went into this underground mall. And so it wasn't, I'd been totally like, I would have been so happy if I saw just local, in this place, if they had just set up locals with small shops. But no, this was a mall for all kinds of corporate branding. Um, and so going through that to a temple, it just didn't hit me the right way. Um, the no, I'm kind of thinking about how Muhammad smashed all the idols. I mean, what's the corporate idol of today? If not, what's the idol of today if not a corporate logo? Um, so that, and when I got into, because I've been into a lot of mosques in my travels, and oftentimes they're very friendly places where you can just go and sit down and pray or meditate. Um, Whereas this wasn't really set up that way. Although it said that they do have some services there, but all the places where you just normally, you know, go to pray, even whether it be in the lines that are often set up at the main services, or just where where you'd sit down on the carpet to, um, you know, pray or meditate on your own, they were all walled off, or not walled off, but like roped off. Um, as if you could only walk a certain path through what was um, more of a museum. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with making a temple with gorgeous art of of any stripe. But I was, I mean, Thai temples do that. They're kind of almost museum like in that sense, and I don't mind that. But they don't, um, you know, other mosques I've been to, all the various Buddhist temples in Thailand I've been to. Oh, if someone wants to just sit down in the shrine part or stand or whatever and do their own quiet prayer meditation, they're welcome to do it. Um, and that wasn't the case. It was just kind of stay along the path. Um, Even though the place is amazing aesthetically, the vibe wasn't there. I mean, I would, um, I was kind of thinking about how much warmer I got treated, say, going into the National Masjid in Malaysia. Um, that was kind of my experience there. And if you want to go and comment on what I just said, well, go for it. Over to
Yeah,
you.
of course, brother Matt. And it's very important that you mention this because what they're trying to do to the UAE is basically make it a haven for the future, and they're catering to Western interest. They recently normalized relations with Israel. I think they had a Jewish wedding there recently. Besides that, they're opening a Hindu temple. So they're catering to these different populations, especially the rich and wealthy amongst them, to come and live and invest in Dubai. So Dubai is like not an Arab nation anymore, because if you go there, majority of the workers and the people running everything are non-Arabs. Yeah, you do have the Arab elite that are running the country and the main positions in leaderships, like we see in most of these Middle Eastern countries, where they're recruiting Pakistanis, Hindus, Filipinos, those from like Southeast Asian countries. So I would see it as an extension of the Western white supremacy at this point, because they're catering to the rich and wealthy, and they're exploiting third world workers who are coming there trying to make a living. And I think that's what it is. Those that have money, especially rich families, I have seen those that are rich in other countries immigrate to Dubai. But I mean, as far as I see, there is an underlying deception behind all of that.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, there were some definite signs that, for example, when I say you have to go underground into the main mosque in Abu Dhabi, I mean they had murals and like photographic murals along the wall when you got past the uh the corporate stores. Um, but they had one for tolerance, and under tolerance, though, the only their big photos that have been blown up wall size there were only two of them. One was welcoming the Pope, and the other was welcoming uh, Phil and Lizzie Windsor. So not exactly diverse. Um, I'll contrast that with a country like Malaysia, which is also a majority Muslim country, but has incredible religious diversity, and for better or for worse, and um, you see poor people there too. I'm not trying to encourage, the um, the wealth and poverty contrast that you see, but at least those the temples of all religions are pretty much open to the public, and you see plenty of poor people around them. And they're still really nice temples themselves.
Well, that's the thing, brother Matt. Dubai is just an extension of the Western supremacy of the world, and it's just another Western country pushing the same agendas, but at the same time with an Arab flavor and making it all nice and beautiful. Well, inside there's a pit of darkness.
Yeah, yeah, and to me it wasn't. It was what you see. What I kind of had where you could see what it could be if it wasn't like that. Um, because and I'll also maybe throw in another small city state like Singapore. Okay. Um, Now these places are both very rich, and if you look at bigger countries, the wealth tends to be concentrated in the cities, and a lot of um, tax money from the cities ends up going into the rural areas. Um, but really, I mean, another place a lot of that tax money goes is to bail out, corporations and that sort of thing. So, here they don't have the burden of having to create a huge infrastructure over a lot of land the way other countries, would. And you just think, well, if the larger countries instead of, could keep, sending the tax dollars into the rural areas, but maybe cut, tax the wealthy a lot more and not give them all these breaks and these corporate subsidies and things like that, then you really could have that access and actually build everybody up and have um great aesthetic monuments that would be for everybody, and it wouldn't be a symbol of the disparity between the two, but could be unifying. Everybody, and because of all the what could be generated from building all of this, but instead that's not what we're seeing right now. we're seeing, um, these things go up with underpaid labor. Over to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like what we see with the Burj Khalifa. It's the modern day Tower of Babel, reaching to the depths of the heavens, and that's what they're trying to accomplish with their wealth. And one of the signs of the world ending that the Prophet Muhammad even mentioned was you would have these wealthy Arabs, and they would basically make these tall monuments and exploit the helpless. Everything in that goes against the laws of Islam. And unfortunately, the modern day Arabs, this is my opinion, people don't have to like me for it. And I'm myself am from that part of the land. So I would say the modern day Arab and their values are not compatible with Islam. They're only about their own self and how they can get ahead compared to the others. And if they have to exploit people, they will. And this even goes back all the way to the days of the African slave trade. So this is not anything new that these guys are doing, and it goes all against Islam. That's why the majority of the world's Muslims are non-Arabs. And in the future, the leadership of Islam will go to the non-Arabs as well, because they did not do a good job of holding it.
Yeah, I definitely had better experiences in Malaysia. Which is not to say there's not corruption there too, but I won't say it's as there seems to be at least some care, um, for working people. They still have, they have their issues with homelessness, definitely worse than here in Thailand. And with them having oil, um, they could definitely do something about it. But there was at least there was at least more of an acceptance of everybody, rich and poor. Um, which I found much more welcoming. Not to say that your average restaurateur or grocery store worker in Abu Dhabi was mean or anything. They're very nice people, very welcoming. They're just they're the workers. They're the common folk. Um, but I definitely found, say, Malaysia a better place. Even Turkey. Um, I could go into the mosque there, and there were all kinds of kids playing, and even one even tripped over me. Where I was just kind of, in my own quiet prayer. So I've definitely seen, what it, a better example of what it can be. Not maybe not a perfect one. It doesn't exist in this world, and there's a lot of crap. But you could, it runs the spectrum. Put it that way.
Well, I mean, if you look at the wealth of a lot of these elite royal families, and it's funny because they would execute and kill and imprison people over some of the laws and systems in their countries. Well, when they come to Western countries with their money, they're participating in the same activities. And I've seen many Arabs who would basically, when they come here, they just intermingle and become a part of the white supremacy system. So that's why I don't differentiate between them and the things that need to change in the world. And if you look at the concept of zakat in Islam, where you're supposed to donate a certain amount of your wealth to the poor, if a lot of these Arab royal families, even if they gave a fraction, less than a fraction of their wealth, they would solve all of the poverty and all of these other issues that are occurring in the Muslim world. And I think that's their hypocrisy. And who put these people in
Yeah.
charge? They were put in charge by British intelligence in World War One. That's who these fucks are.
Yep. And now basically, Britain definitely still supports that, as does the U.S. Um, keeping them in power.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. And I think over time, hopefully, with the young generation and the generations after, hopefully we'll see some monuments of change occurring through social media, through awareness, through social justice and activism. And I mean, that's the same song and dance here in America. You have these different parties that come up, and behind the scenes, they're all friends. They just play this drama with one another, and they would say, "Oh, okay, the Republicans are not helping me pass these bills." When the next party comes in charge, oh, the Democrats are stopping me. So they just play the same drama continuously, waste the time of the people, and nothing gets done.
Yeah, I'll totally agree with you on that. That's what happens. That's actually a good segue into me talking about current developments in Thailand. Now, in Thailand, there is some genuine conflict. Granted, it's between different interests, but there are some actual real differences. Um, Now, if anyone's hearing anything come out of Thailand recently, they've probably heard that um, a new prime minister was elected, although he hasn't taken office yet. There's all kinds of things that have to be done in the parliament to ratify him and all that. Granted, it's not quite been 2 months. One thing that you will hear that you kind of want to, I kind of want to tell people, oh, shut up, is why is it taking so long? And I'm like, well, in the U.S., it's standard for it to be 2.5 months. Shut up, you know. Now, granted, there's not an official date because the Parliament has to meet to approve and etc. So it could take longer, but when the West is, you see the toxic comment sections. Why is it taking so long? It's like still ain't been as much time as it has in the U.S. So you know, look at yourself. um, but what you'll probably hear from a from Western sources is that you've had the administration that has been in power for the last 9 years um, has been very conservative, that now a much more liberal and progressive um, party and prime minister have been elected. And that's bullshit. um, because now, I'm not going to say the reverse is true either, but if you look at what we would tend to think of as conservative versus liberal in the West, you could cherry pick certain issues and make that claim about the Thai elections, but you could also cherry pick other issues and make the complete opposite claim. But what needs to be noted, and what's interesting, is they're using um, the new, because you actually don't vote for the candidate, you vote for the party, and they have their candidate. And it's not like they changed their candidate around. I mean, that candidate is on the ballot as their candidate for the prime ministership, but you kind of have to vote the party all at once for whoever else they're running in your district, rather than being able to like pick and choose. Um, but what's you'll notice they'll sometimes label the prime minister elect as liberal, but oftentimes they'll use a word you don't hear too much in Western media when describing a politician. You're hearing the word progressive, which is definitely more accurately being the opposite of conservative in terms of the language than the word liberal. And I would say that both conservatives and liberals are kind of to the right, if you ask me. But what needs to be known is that this party, they're actually called the Move Forward Party. That's not a translation of their Thai name. That's their actual name. It's English. So I can get into a lot more on this, but that should be a clue to anyone that this party is London Wall Street backed. And so you're seeing what is, when you get down to it, blatant racism by saying that an Asian country has elected someone who is quote unquote progressive simply because they are more in line with Western ideology.
Yeah, that is so true, brother Matt. I mean, it's all self-evident for those that have the heart to feel and the eyes to see. Recently, I came across a brother here in the region where I live, and he worked in Saudi Arabia. He's an American engineer, and he worked in Saudi Arabia for a period of 2 decades, 20 years. And what he told me, he said, like, if you go to these Arab nations, none of those people work. And that's why they bring in people from other countries, because they have so much wealth. They basically do everything for them. That's why they need the the highly experienced people from the American and European countries. That's why they bring in the third world labor from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, and these different countries to do the work that they themselves they feel elite and wealthy to not get their hands dirty. So he said those guys don't work and they have all the money in the world to give them that kind of lifestyle. It's just like basically a form of elitism that, oh, this kind of work is beneath me. So with the wealth that I have, instead of helping poor people or helping those that need it, I'm just going to use it to fund my lifestyle and fund the lifestyle of our nation. So a lot of these guys have fallen away from the true values of Islam, and I mean, it's it's unfortunate, and that's why I believe a major change is going to occur within the next 10 to 15 years, in our lifetime, to say the very least, on the aspects of this geopolitical situation that we're dealing with. And now Dubai is catering to the world audience, especially the rich and the wealthy, no matter who they are, to come and live and invest and work in their countries. And they're doing a lot of things, which also hurts the environment, which they produce fake rain. They're making the deserts green. They're doing all of this other stuff. So even when I went to Qatar and I saw the Hamad International Airport, I did not see one Arab working there. It was all Filipinos and Indians. Same thing in the airlines. So that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely agree with you on that. And there's a catering to now that now that we were talking last time about the pivot to Asia, but what's happening? I mean, it's it's happening everywhere, but a place like the Emirates or Qatar is a good example where it's diversity amongst the rich. It's kind of like it's kind of what the Democratic Party is basically. Um, where we'll exploit you, but we'll do it with a smile and make sure we have some token representatives. Um, in various positions and in our advertisements and that sort of thing. Um,
See,
and what
that's why Dubai. Sorry to cut you off for a second. That's why Dubai is catering and making all of these Hindu temples all over the place because they're catering to the rich Indians and Hindus who are investing God knows how much in terms of their living, investing, and working in Dubai.
Yeah, and there are, well, since you mentioned, the main nation for Hinduism being India, there's quite a bit of economic, injustice and disparity in India. Some say it's one of the worst places on the planet. I haven't actually been there. But what I do know is there are various Indian peoples, throughout Southeast Asia. Um, and a lot of them are really friendly to me. But what is very interesting is every one of them that I've met in my travels has come to India. Um, which I do want to do one day, obviously. Preferably even sooner than later. But I mean, if they're obviously trying to put their mark on the world too. Now, granted, those who are traveling have some money, but I'm getting this feeling there's at least some sense there of, okay, come see for yourself, because tourism will, if you're the kind of, and I've usually met them, pretty simple, pretty, not overly ritzy places, where I've met, run into other tourists who were Indian. Um, obviously they see that, patronizing a small business, helps that local person. So I get the feeling that there's at least, some compassion among those that have, from many of those who have the money to travel to try and, like, hey, come spend, the money here and help, help our workers, help our small businesses. So, it's not to say there's not, just, as we know, much disparity, but there's at least some sense of care. Also when and I kind of I'll make a comparison with Thailand. This prime minister elect. Now, he was actually Harvard educated. He speaks English, so I've seen English clips of him. And what he says, and it sounds good at first, but it's when you start thinking about it, you're like, wait a minute, that's screwed up. He says that, look, most of the tourists come to, Bangkok, Pattaya, Phuket, and Chiang Mai, and he says, I want to have the tourism spread all over the country. Now, that sounds good at first, but look, tourists go where they want to go. So the only way to create a sudden, switching of that to balance, tourists going to Thailand to all regions is by a lot of corporatized package tours, which may distribute the money regionally, but will probably screw over the poorer people, all the small business owners, which there are a lot of in Thailand, all the street vendors, the humble businesses. They are, with the package. If you take people on package tours, everything's going to be handled through the tour through a large company where they're paying their workers as low as they can. Whereas if you just kind of going wherever, even if it might be to a more touristy area, you're at least, if you go to a street vendor or to, a local shop, you see a whole lot of just like small little, call them grocery stores, call them convenience stores in the bottom floor of a home kind of thing, just like you see in Philly, in certain neighborhoods. You see a lot of that. So you all of a sudden distribute the tourists throughout the country. You're obviously doing it corporately, and you're actually creating more of an economic disparity in disguised under more fair regional distribution.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the situation of the world that we're seeing in. And right now, I mean, most people had this idea of escaping to some utopia, like many people have about Dubai and other places. But keep in mind that I also travel the world. So what I saw in America, in the UK, in Pakistan, even in Qatar, when I was stopping there for a bit, all these places, the inflation is out of control. Those that have the money, the wealthy and the rich, they're the ones who are lavishing it up. While majority of your people are surviving with what they have and from paycheck to paycheck. So it's just that illusion where they're just catering to the wealthy. They don't care about the average man or average woman who's trying to survive in today's world. So that's what we're dealing with. It's not like you can escape anywhere because the deception and the inflation and increase in crime and the way people are just acting dirty with each other, I think that's just going to occur. It's just going to culminate to that point where that 0 point event will occur because, I mean, we see the way the earth is reacting to humanity with the storms and the irrational weather. It says that in Surah 99 of the Holy Quran that God, Allah, will inspire the earth to throw out her burdens, and then mankind will say what is wrong with her. So now what's going to happen is that that divine retribution and 0 point event and punishment is coming for humanity, and people need to get their acts together and have a world of equality where everyone is being treated equally and just and according to the laws of Islam and according to the laws of the Bayan.
I definitely agree. Now, what I want to interject, I don't want to say counter anything, but what we see though often in, well, I'm totally cool with the idea of, you know, the divine creator a la nature saying enough of this shit. So far, oftentimes, what happens is that the people most impacted by that are the poor, simply because the rich can build more stuff that they, can hide in. you know. Um, so I hope that God has a way of being kind of selective there. More than
Yeah,
more than what we've seen.
I hope so too. It's funny, there was I believe an imam or a leader, somebody has a video I was listening to not too long ago, and he said the same thing. He said it doesn't matter if they hide in their underground bunkers or military bases, the divine retribution will catch them anywhere.
Yeah, I just hope it can catch them without it, slaughtering a lot of innocents along the way. Um,
I hope so too, my
and
brother.
I definitely think, although this whole crazy amount of greed that is enveloping the earth, although it's everywhere, I mean, I definitely think there are places where it's worse and better. Um, so that's why I'm in Thailand. I'm not saying Thailand's the only place, but there is. It's in addition to just being a much friendlier place. Now there are um there is there is at least some respect um even among some of the elites um for the little guy, for the worker. Um and it's why it does, the Western propaganda here does really scare me, is because it's trying to sucker people away from that. Thailand has probably more street vendors, just simple um, merchants setting up shop in the street, whether it be at a night market or being at a local place. And even some of the corporations allow that. I mean, you can go and see street vendors in the small parking lot of 7-Eleven here. And, as much as 7-Eleven might be a big corporation, at least here, they allow that. Like, okay, do your thing. So there's at least some of that here. And one thing that's really not talked about is I'm really scared that if Thailand westernized more, that you would have, essentially, the draft laws try and put these guys out of business. Already the prime minister elect is talking about, because one thing where I'm going to say that the whole conservative of the what would be the outgoing. Now, there's some ways that could. There's ways that Prime Minister elect Pita won't end up becoming prime minister, which is a whole bureaucratic thing. I won't go into not to bore anybody, but there are ways it could end up not happening. But what would be called the outgoing, if he does get in, what they're actually calling, and I think it's a fair enough term, the current, what they call the current caretaker prime minister. Um, One thing that his um, administration did was decriminalize marijuana. Now, I'm not trying to advocate for drug use. I've only ever smoked the stuff once, but I know my share of epileptics who it really helps. Not to mention it's not anywhere near as bad as alcohol, and you can actually see people selling cannabis products, street vendors. You can see it at a night market. There's plenty of actual shops too that have it, but there are there's plenty of small businesses that actually sell cannabis products. Um, whereas and this is the administration that everybody is in the West is wanting to label as conservative. Not with that one, they ain't. Um, and yet, um, the potentially incoming prime minister elect is saying he wants to, make sure it's regulated. Now, translation, he wants to corporatize it. And when you have Western companies here that sell, Western restaurants that sell food, McDonald's, KFC, etc. What happens in the long run when these companies, we can already see a push to corporatize cannabis here. What happens, and granted, they'd have to do it very slowly because if they did it quickly, there'd be a huge rebellion. But you can definitely see them wanting to regulate, food more. Granted, they do it under the guise of sanitation and all that, but hey, you can see what a street vendor's doing. You can make up your own mind whether it's sanitary or not. It's not like they're hiding in the restaurant in the back where you don't get to see anything. Hiding, in a kitchen. Um, so you can see, what happens when they slowly try to, since, such a huge part of the economy is food, and not to say that there aren't, big companies here of agribusiness and things like that, but there are also a lot of family farms, a lot of street vendors selling food, small business, restaurants, and other shops. Now, what happens when they start creating legislation to put the small guys out of business and corporatize the food even more? That's something I don't want to see, and I hope Thailand will resist that. Over to you.
Yeah, that's right, brother Matt. And hopefully that change does come to fruition. And that's the same thing I saw in Pakistan, where it is a Muslim country, but those that have wealth, the top 1%, who are often supported by the Western supremacy anyway, where a lot of the Pakistani politicians and leaderships all can trace their origins back to London. So the concept of the British Raj is still there, and it's easier to control them when you tell a slave that they have their freedom. So a lot of the elite of Southeast Asia, whether it's Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, the surrounding regions, the top 1% are still they're groomed and educated in British universities and by British intelligence. And it's still the same system in charge where these people are impoverished, they're being taxed to death, they don't have anything, and they're always trying to escape to another country to have a better form of life. And that's the same thing I've seen in Pakistan. Those that have money, regardless of being a Muslim country, they had access to drugs, alcohol, escort services, you name it. They're doing much more degrading things there than what you see here in the Western countries out in the open. And that's the unfortunate truth. And not just Southeast Asia, anywhere where there's been British or French colonialism, The top 1% are usually tied back to the slave master who still controls the land and its resources in some way. I mean, even with France, look at how much colonial tax they receive from Africa every year. People can look this up, and it's true. France and England would not survive without these colonies. And even if you go to, let's say, the UK, anything that's still owned by Britain is still known as a Commonwealth and a High Commission. Their embassies are referred to as High Commissions. So if you go to the, let's say, Pakistani embassy or the Indian embassy in London, they're referred to as High Commissions. So that illusion of the world, it's still, even if you go back 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, it's still the same people in charge, doing the same stuff, exploiting the same less fortunate peoples, and under the guise of now liberalism and everything is nice and beautiful and everything is okay, everything is nice, but it's still the same deception that's occurring against the less fortunate.
Yeah, and I'm not saying to give a little contrast into what I see here in Thailand and some other Southeast Asian countries. There is a genuine power struggle. Now, Thailand, for example, was never colonized. However, when you have a country who's anywhere from 12 to 20%, depending on what stats you read, and granted, it's not like they can record everything. Because I mean, hey, how do you, if people are paying in cash, how do you know whether people who spent their money in a restaurant, are, locals, or tourists? So obviously there's gonna be some debate on what the number is, but depending on what you read, anywhere from 12 to 25% of the Thai economy is based on tourism. It comes from tourism. Um, Now you can't have that dependency on it without there being some neocolonialism, because you're catering to people coming from other places, and of course you're trying to, with which it comes, attracting investors and things like that. Um, Now those who have been labeled the conservatives here, which again isn't really very accurate. Um, and again, it's just to say that they're trying to keep their country behind rather than westernized. A lot of the leadership is pretty elite too, and I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch. It's more of a, what tends to happen is the best analogy is more like they tend to be like an over strict parent trying to protect from the predator, but often don't realize um, how much some of their um, techniques actually drive their citizens towards these, neocolonial predators. Um, Especially not willing to, to discuss, how things happen and that sort of thing. Um, so there's a long history there. Another thing that, even though I, in those situations will support the parent, the strict parent over the predator, the strict parent does need to be called out for their shit. And another thing I want to bring up on this whole subject is the whole red browning we see in the world. Because what's happening with, I mean, I hate, and mainly the red browning seems to at least visibly be coming out of Russia. Granted, there can be some elites wherever who are pouring the money in there. But that's the front of that. And what you see is a tendency of these red browners to kind of label, and because they are very right wing, will want to throw, even though it's probably the more neoliberal West that's creating, say for Thailand, this very inaccurate conservative progressive labeling of politicians. it's playing right into the Red Browners' hands. Um, by then having, the ones who are the more nationalistic, um, being labeled as conservative, even though it's not, and they're certainly not all of the same stripe, but in just the way you hear Russia and China in the West mentioned in the same sentence. They might they might have relationships of convenience, but they're not allies, and they know it. But there's a whole um, attempt, by this red browning fascist circle to label anyone who's basically nationalistic, trying to have some resistance to the West as conservative, to try and promote their right wing fascist bullshit. So you got to be very careful on that one, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. You do need that discernment, and you do need to be able to see what's occurring in the world and how it's going to impact you, not only in the present but also in the future. I mean, which goes to my next question. In terms of what you've seen so far in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, where do you see the power structure of the world going within the next 10 years? Because we see the Western nations are already in decline in terms of happiness, marriages, salaries, careers. It's expensive. The crime is out of control. Law enforcement's useless to many extents, unless like you're a favorite party, which they will try to get justice for. But besides that, I've seen a trend of many Americans also renewing their passports and moving to other countries. What do you think will become of this in terms of this exodus that's occurring from the Western world to these different parts of the world where people are living much happier lives? I mean, even in, I believe in some European countries, they have a better standard of living than America. So, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Um, well, the growing power is China. I mean, for better or for worse, and kind of both, kind of both. Um, the growing power is China. Um, you might have some nations posturing and trying to play their games that it's them. I mean, Russia's doing a big show of that right now, but I mean, I'll quote Richard Wolff's stats. The GDP of the U.S. Um, is about 21 trillion. Okay, now they're throwing Russia and China into the same, into the same breath. The thing is, the only nation that has that kind of economic power to compare is China, which has a GDP of about 17 trillion. If you actually take away all the basically, I want to call it pretty much, money created by usury. Not to say that doesn't happen everywhere, but and I don't just mean loans, but the biblical and Quranic definition of usury, making money off of money itself, which would certainly be all this like derivatives trading and hedge funds and that sort of crap. You take that away, China probably has a bigger economy in that sense. So that's where it is. And granted, nearby nations will get a boost. Now as more infrastructure is developed. Now, whereas Russia has a GDP of about 2 trillion, it is not a competitor on that level. It really isn't. Um, Now it's good that at least that you have a place that is managing to succeed and growing, but you have to ask the question, how? And there's a lot of uncertainty in the future of where that's going to go. Because right now, if we look, I'll look them, my own communist ideals here. Um, what you have, um, now there are no communist countries. You have in some places what we call socialism, which Lenin himself simply referred to as state capitalism. And Lenin knew that the Soviet Union needed to keep changing, because what had happened is the government had taken over the role of the bourgeoisie. Now, granted, that can, in theory at least, have, and sometimes in practice, can have at least an entity in control that doesn't have to be profit motivated. Now, because you get government workers who are just getting a salary to make sure things get done right. But unfortunately, Lenin died, Stalin came to power, and Stalin liked being in charge of that and didn't want to progress the country forward. That's kind of where China is right now. Now, they have some private capitalism, they have some state capitalism, they're working to mix it. It's growing, and they have brought most of their population, some would say all their population, out of extreme poverty. And that's a good thing, but there's still the question of, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, and are they going to progress towards a society where you don't have that class distinction? And that's very uncertain right now. And you probably have forces, and I'm sure there are both, there are both of those forces in China. So which way they go, we'll see. It's working to at least, I won't disparage the fact that they did, raise people, raise a whole lot of people out of poverty. But let's keep in mind that American capitalism brought a lot of people out of poverty too, post-World War II, but it was because they were able to exploit the rest of the world. Now that the rest of the world's resisting, it's not going to be so easy anymore, and that's why you're seeing that decline. And so it could become a real mess. It could become a real mess real soon.
That's so correct, because even when I was in Pakistan, and Pakistan is an ally of China, they share a border together, and they've kind of formed an alliance to counteract India in some ways. So they are kind of helping each other, and also Pakistan is a nuclear armed country. So besides all those things, what I'm seeing China do is they're going to all of these places, whether it's in Africa, the Middle East, and places like that, where the U.S. caused destruction through their foreign policy, and they're rebuilding the homes, the schools, factories, creating jobs. I know China will always have their own incentive behind what they do, but in terms of what the U.S. did and compared to what China's doing, there's a big difference. They're even helping the Palestinians with aid. And I saw a video in Iraq, and I believe Baghdad, where they built a modern day facility for schools with bathrooms, classrooms, air conditioned facilities, and I see them contributing much to the world. I know they have their own agenda behind it, but in terms of the U.S., I see them actually helping the world in a more way. It's like a lesser evil, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I won't even go. I won't to this point go to quite to the point of evil. Not to say that there's not some evil in China. There's some evil everywhere. But yeah, to compare and it is a joke when people start talking about China's expansion as just more colonialism. No. It doesn't compare. That's not to say it's perfect, but just the way the U.S. rose. Now, yeah, they exploited a lot of people. They also helped others. At what point? I think there's a big question with China: is at what point will they? Are they going to continue? Yeah, right now they're building stuff up, and even very early on, the U.S. did that in places with the Marshall Plan. Will they keep building stuff up, or will they not? That's kind of the question of where you know what path China will take. I think that remains to be seen. I don't think we really know at this point. Um, and yeah, Xi is holding on to power, but that won't last forever. What factions get in next? Who knows? There's really too many variables to be certain on that.
I think only time will basically answer that
Yeah, I
question
think
for us, because there are too many speculations, and of course what we're seeing on the ground level. I think, let's say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I believe that's when we will see what is the result of all of this in terms of the declining West and the increasing East. Because when I took the macroeconomics course in college, that was a part of my degree. To get my degree, macroeconomics, the professor that I had was a retired U.S. Army officer. And with his background and mannerisms, he said he also gave briefings at the Pentagon, and he was still tied into the system in some way. He was just doing that class part time to teach since he was in the area. So he said, he said this in 2016. So he said within the next 10 years, by 2026, that we would see the economic power of the world shift from the West to the East. And that's why the concept of the American dream and running after that dream, or those that immigrate to these countries for a better life, soon you're going to see that trend increase towards other lands outside of the US, the UK, and things like that.
yeah. Well, when you mention that now, because frankly, that can't happen for the whole world, as we know the American dream to be. Not to say that there can't be a dream of a future with all kinds of creature comforts. Okay, that is possible, but the American version of it is not sustainable, mainly because of cars. Only 19% of the world's population owns cars. The world cannot sustain every family having a car. It just can't. At least not with our current technology. Not with
It's
fossil
too
fuels.
many people, and there's not enough infrastructure.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you well, what you need is because rail is cheaper than in terms of hauling goods. Rail is cheaper, or in terms of fuel, or in terms of fuel expense, fuel put out. Rail is more efficient by a factor of 10 over trucks. And right now, China is building a whole bunch of rails. Now, and not just in China. Granted, a lot of it's coal powered right now. They're trying to transition to thorium nuclear, which would be much better. It has its dangers, but not anywhere near as much as uranium and plutonium do. So if they can, so if we create a society where we can have maybe a standard of living that was the American dream for the world, but it's not good. I don't think it can involve a car, because even if you have electric cars, I mean, the material, the amount of materials and mining that go into it, and the fact that you have to plug that thing in, and that has to get its power from somewhere. Um, I don't see a world of everybody having a car as sustainable at all. But maybe if we're willing to have public transportation, if we have more rails, subways, um, and that sort of thing, then I think we might be able to get more to that. Um, Also, everybody having a house, a comfortable house with the modern creature comforts. That's possible.
Well, it's like what you see in cities like New York and other big major cities, that you have the majority of the people that can get to point A to point B and back in return without needing a vehicle. So you do have those big cities that have that infrastructure set up, and they do have the system set up where they can go anywhere they wish within a span of minutes without needing a car. That's what I experienced in London as well with the underground system they built. It's called the Tube, one of the oldest in the world. And you could get from like one place to another in the span of minutes. That's how interconnected everything has become.
Yeah, I definitely. Well, the city where I experienced that, where I think that was the best developed was Singapore.
Right, right.
Um,
They have a good
I
metro system.
yeah, they have an excellent one. Um, and interestingly enough, it wasn't. And what they do is they actually don't make it just to cater to everything going into the center. They have rails going around, and they have that. They also have, you know, subway lines, basically, and actually a few of them that go around the city as well. Um, so I mean, Singapore is about 5 million, Bangkok's about 8 million, and yet the Singapore metro is nowhere near as crowded as it is in Bangkok. Now, granted, Bangkok's expanding, and with the same company. So you can definitely see that you can. Singapore at least has that shows that potential. Granted, it's still plenty capitalist, it's still expensive. Um, but in terms of being, and it's also got very, as small as it is very militaristic, especially in like the cyber sense. It's all kinds of ads in the subways about trying to recruit their minds into cybersecurity, drone security, that sort of thing. Which I'm not too crazy about. But in terms of um, being pedestrian friendly, beats any other city of Benin easily. So those things are possible. You just have to balance them. You balance that with the humanity. Then we can get an idea, of what a bright future could look like.
I think so too. I think as time goes on and we're seeing all of this age that we're in of, let's say, AI and the changing politics and geopolitics, only time will really tell. And what we can do is just take an educated guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Do
We
you
take
have any?
our and we try to do our best to. I mean, I'm trying. I'm not going to go into it, for personal reasons, but the whole concept, the concepts of integrity, concepts of what in Buddhism they call right livelihood. Don't have your livelihood um, conflict, with your vision, your humanity, and that is very hard to be perfect on in this world. Let's face it. But I have been starting to think a lot about, okay, um, how do I change this? You know, how do I live in a way that is contributing to not just a personal vision, but a vision for the world? I think that's a question we all have to start asking ourselves, because the system sets it. I mean, the system sets us up to perpetuate evil, and it takes not just being nice to other people, but to really ask the question about how we change our own lifestyle to not perpetuate the system.
I think so too, brother Matt. And I think that would be a good way to conclude this podcast. Do you have any closing thoughts you would like to give the listeners until next time?
No, since I mean, there were a few other things I wanted to talk about, but they're different topics. So maybe we can address them later.
Yeah, we could save that for the future. This was a wonderful episode. And of course, there was a lot of things that we delved into. And I hope those that listened, you were able to take something away from it, as we always do, talking with brother Matt Douglas. And until next time, Nora Lakeum, and thank you.
I like them, bro.